From the moment I met Grayson Carter, my life revolved around him. He was the kind of person who could light up a room just by walking into it. His laughter was infectious, his charm effortless, and his smile? That was the kind of thing that could stop time. But what I felt for him went beyond admiration. It was an aching, all consuming love that I didn't know how to handle, let alone confess. He wasn't just my best friend. He was the person I wanted more than anything in the world. Every morning before school, I found solace in a secret ritual. With trembling hands and a heart full of longing, I would pour my feelings onto paper, writing letters I could never say aloud. Each word was carefully chosen, every sentence a piece of my soul. I wasn't brave enough to tell him face to face, but through those letters, I felt free, if only for a moment. They became my lifeline, the one thing keeping me afloat in a sea of unspoken emotions. Sliding the letters into his locker was both thrilling and terrifying. I would arrive early, ensuring the hallways were empty, my heart racing as I slipped the folded papers through the narrow slit. I never stayed to see his reaction. I couldn't bear the thought of being caught, or, worse, seeing disappointment in his eyes. The act became second nature, like breathing, though every time it felt as if I were walking a tightrope over a chasm of uncertainty. Grayson's reaction to the letters was a bittersweet torment. He'd often read them at lunch, a playful smile tugging at his lips as he tried to decode the mystery of his admirer. His friends teased him endlessly, speculating about who the secret girl might be. My heart swelled with a strange mix of pride and pain, knowing he appreciated my words, but believing they came from someone I could never be. Sometimes I caught him reading the letters alone, his brows furrowed in concentration. Those moments gave me hope, fleeting as they were. What if, deep down, he sensed it was me? What if he didn't care about who wrote them, but instead focused on how they made him feel? These thoughts were dangerous, yet I couldn't stop them from creeping in, fueling my fantasies and breaking my heart simultaneously. My love for him felt like both a blessing and a curse. Being close to him, sharing laughs and stories, made my days brighter, but it also made the distance between us unbearable. I wanted more, needed more, but the fear of losing him kept me silent. It was a cruel paradox, loving him in secret while yearning for a love I could never have. But secrets have a way of unraveling, no matter how tightly you hold on to them. And the day Grayson discovered the truth was the day my carefully constructed world began to crumble. It wasn't supposed to happen the way it did, but life has a cruel sense of timing, doesn't it? Grayson's voice echoed across the cafeteria, brimming with excitement as he waved another letter in the air. Guys, she's at it again. This mystery girl's amazing. Seriously, her words are... I don't even know how to describe it. His smile was radiant, drawing attention from everyone around him. He was the center of the universe, and I was just a moon orbiting his light, forever out of reach. I sat at our usual table, my face buried in a book I wasn't really reading. Every word he said felt like a dagger to my chest, sharp and unrelenting. The way he talked about the letters, thinking they came from a girl, was both a relief and a heartbreak. I wanted him to feel special, but I also wanted him to know it was me. How could I live with both desires tearing me apart? His friends chimed in, teasing him relentlessly. Maybe it's Sarah from chemistry, one of them suggested, earning a round of laughter. Or that girl from the track team. She's always staring at you. The speculation was endless, and Grayson played along, his grin never faltering. It was a game to them, but to me it was life and death. "Whoever she is, she's got guts," Grayson said, his tone softer now. "These letters, they're not just flirty. They're deep. It's like she knows me better than anyone." His words sent a shiver down my spine. He wasn't wrong, but hearing him say it out loud made it all too real. I stole a glance at him, my heart pounding in my chest. He was running his fingers through his messy blonde hair, a habit he always did when he was thinking hard. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine what it would be like if he knew the truth. Would he hate me, laugh at me, or would he finally see me for who I was? "Elliot, you've been quiet," Grayson said suddenly, pulling me from my thoughts. His piercing blue eyes locked onto mine, and I felt my breath catch. "What do you think? Should I try to find out who she is?" I hesitated, my mind racing for an answer that wouldn't betray me. "Maybe she likes the mystery," I said finally, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "Sometimes it's better not to know." It was a lie, of course, but it was the only thing I could think to say. The school hallways were nearly empty as I slipped another letter into his locker. My hands trembled slightly, but the routine had become muscle memory. I told myself it was safe. No one ever came this early. Just as I adjusted the paper to sit perfectly, I heard a voice behind me. "Elliot, what are you doing?" My heart plummeted. I turned slowly, my eyes meeting Grayson's. His expression was a mix of confusion and disbelief, his brows knitted together. "Is this you?" he asked, gesturing toward the locker. "The letters, they've been from you?" My mouth opened, but no words came out. The truth hung heavy in the air between us. Before I could think of an explanation, Grayson stepped closer, his gaze intense. To my utter shock, he grabbed me by the shirt and pulled me toward him, his lips crashing onto mine. It was raw, unfiltered, and electric. Every buried emotion I had poured into that kiss. But just as quickly as it started, he pulled away, his face a mask of confusion. I can't do this. This isn't me." His voice was tight, almost panicked. "Forget this happened, Elliot, please." The days after our encounter were nothing short of unbearable. Grayson avoided me like the plague, his once friendly and warm demeanor replaced by a cold, impenetrable silence. In class, he sat as far from me as possible. At lunch, he joined other groups, pretending I didn't exist. The boy who used to smile at me like I was his safe space now acted as though I were a stranger, or worse, a mistake he regretted. I spent every free moment replaying that kiss. It was burned into my memory, a bittersweet reminder of everything I had dreamed of, and everything I could never have. Was it a moment of passion for him, or was it an impulsive mistake that left him drowning in shame? The ambiguity was suffocating. Desperate to make amends, I poured my heart into a new letter. But this time, it wasn't a confession of love. It was an apology. Every word begged for forgiveness, for understanding, for him to just talk to me again. But when I stood at his locker, clutching the folded paper, I couldn't bring myself to slide it in. What if it only made things worse? Grayson's friends began to notice his change in behavior. They teased him about the mystery girl breaking his heart, joking that maybe she'd ghosted him. He laughed along with them, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his shoulders tensed. He was crumbling under the weight of our secret, and so was I. The once vibrant connection we shared felt irreparably broken. Every glance he avoided, every word left unsaid was a knife to my chest. I missed the sound of his laughter, the way he used to lean close when we whispered about things only we understood. Now, Even being in the same room as him felt like walking on glass. My friends, oblivious to my inner turmoil, asked if I was okay. I lied, of course. What else could I do? How could I tell them that the person I loved most in the world now looked at me like I was a mistake he wished he could erase? The silence between us grew louder with each passing day, and I started to wonder if this was my new reality, existing in the shadow of a friendship that once felt unbreakable. Grayson couldn't escape his thoughts. The kiss had been impulsive, yes, but it had felt real. Too real. It haunted him, replaying in his mind every time he closed his eyes. He tried to convince himself it meant nothing, that it was just a reaction to the shock of discovering Elliot's secret. But deep down, he knew it wasn't that simple. He threw himself into distractions: football practice, video games, hanging out with friends. Anything to drown out the storm brewing inside him. But no matter how hard he tried, Elliot's face, the hurt in his eyes, and the softness of his lips lingered like a ghost he couldn't banish. Late at night, when the world was quiet, the doubts crept in. What if he'd overreacted? What if he had hurt Elliot more than he realized? The thought made his chest ache, but he quickly shoved it aside. He couldn't go down that path. He wasn't like that. He couldn't be like that. The memory of the letters didn't help. He had reread them countless times, searching for answers in Elliot's carefully chosen words. The depth of emotion in those letters terrified him. No one had ever cared for him like that. Not even the girls he had dated. It was overwhelming, suffocating, and yet comforting. At school, he tried to act like everything was normal, but the tension was palpable. He avoided Elliot's gaze, yet he couldn't stop himself from glancing at him when he thought no one was looking. Elliot seemed smaller somehow, like the weight of the world was pressing down on him. It made Grayson feel like the worst kind of person. The guilt gnawed at him, but so did the fear. Fear of what it all meant. Fear of what people would think if they knew. Fear of losing himself in something he wasn't ready to face. But the more he pushed Elliot away, the more he felt like he was losing a part of himself. He found himself standing in front of Elliot's locker one afternoon, his hand hovering over the door. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he walked away, the weight of his indecision heavier than ever. Grayson told himself he was doing the right thing, that it was better this way. But as he lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was making the biggest mistake of his life. Elliot didn't expect to see Grayson at the park. The sky was dark, heavy with rain clouds, and the air smelled of impending downpour. He had come here to escape, to find a moment of peace in the chaos of his life. But there Grayson was, sitting on a bench, his head bowed and his hands clasped tightly together. For a moment, Elliot considered walking away. He didn't think he could handle another rejection, another reminder of how far they'd drifted apart. But something in Grayson's posture, defeated, almost fragile, made him stay. Grayson looked up as Elliot approached, his eyes widening in surprise. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the distant rumble of thunder. Finally, Grayson broke the silence. "I didn't expect to see you here." Elliot shrugged, his voice quiet but steady. "Didn't think you'd want to see me anywhere." Grayson flinched at the words, guilt flashing across his face. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said, his voice low. I didn't know how to handle it." The rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, soaking them both. But neither of them moved. Elliot crossed his arms, his expression a mix of hurt and defiance. You didn't have to kiss me, Grayson. If you didn't feel anything, you didn't have to do that. Grayson ran a hand through his wet hair, his frustration evident. I don't know what I feel, okay? That's the problem. I kissed you because I wanted to, but it scared the hell out of me. Elliot's heart clenched at the admission, but he didn't let himself hope. So what now? You're scared, so you push me away? Pretend I don't exist? Grayson stood, his voice rising. What do you want from me, Elliot? I'm not like you. I don't know how to deal with this. Elliot stared at him, rain dripping from his hair into his eyes. I didn't want anything from you, Grayson. I just wanted you to see me. But I guess that was too much to ask. The words hung between them, heavy and final. Grayson looked away, unable to meet Elliot's gaze, and with that, Elliot turned and walked away, the rain mixing with the tears he couldn't hold back. Elliot returned home soaked to the bone, the rain clinging to his skin as if it wanted to remind him of everything he couldn't escape. His heart felt heavier than it ever had before, the weight of rejection suffocating him. Grayson's words played in his mind on an endless loop. I'm not like you. They were words he'd feared, ones that sliced deeper than any knife could. He sat down at his desk, the dim light of his lamp illuminating the blank page in front of him. For the first time in months, writing didn't bring him comfort. It felt like a chore, a necessity he needed to fulfill before he could close this chapter of his life. His fingers trembled as he picked up the pen, his heart bleeding into every word he wrote. Grayson, I don't know how to start this, but I guess it doesn't matter. You won't read this until it's too late, and maybe that's for the best. I need you to know that loving you wasn't a choice. It was something I couldn't stop, no matter how hard I tried. From the moment I met you, you became my world. Every laugh, every glance, every moment we shared, they were everything to me. But I get it now. You don't feel the same, and you never will. That's okay. It's not your fault. It's mine. For hoping, for dreaming, for thinking someone like me could ever matter to someone like you. I don't know what comes next for me, but I know one thing. I won't feel this way again. Not for anyone. You were it for me, Grayson. The beginning and the end. I hope you find happiness, even if it's not with me. Goodbye, Elliot. Tears blurred the ink as he finished the letter. He folded it carefully, placing it on his desk before lying down on his bed. The storm outside mirrored the chaos within him, thunder rumbling in the distance as the rain pounded against the windows. He closed his eyes, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths as he surrendered to the darkness of his thoughts. Grayson stood at his locker the next morning, the world around him feeling strangely muted. His friends chattered nearby, their voices a dull hum he couldn't focus on. Something gnawed at him, a sense of unease he couldn't shake. When he opened his locker, a folded piece of paper fell out, landing at his feet. He picked it up, recognizing Elliot's handwriting instantly. His stomach twisted as he unfolded the letter, his eyes scanning the words. With each sentence, the air seemed to grow heavier, the walls closing in around him. By the time he finished, his hands were trembling and his vision blurred with unshed tears. Elliot, he whispered to himself, the name catching in his throat. He reread the letter, each word a dagger to his heart. He hadn't realized how deeply he'd hurt him, how much Elliot had been carrying alone. The guilt was unbearable, crashing over him like the waves of a relentless ocean. His mind raced as he pieced together the implications of the letter. The finality of Elliot's words terrified him. What had he done? What had he pushed Elliot to? Panic set in, and he shoved the letter into his pocket before taking off down the hall, ignoring the confused looks from his friends. Grayson searched for Elliot everywhere, in the classroom, the library, even the cafeteria, but there was no sign of him. His fear grew with each passing moment, the thought of losing Elliot forever consuming him. He cursed himself for his cowardice, for not facing his own feelings sooner. By the time he found himself standing in front of Elliot's house, he was soaked from the rain that hadn't stopped since the night before. He knocked on the door, his heart pounding as he waited. No answer. He tried again, louder this time, but still nothing. Desperation clawed at him as he yelled, "Elliot, please open the door!" He didn't care if the neighbors heard. He didn't care about anything except finding Elliot and making things right. But the house remained silent. The rain, the only sound accompanying his growing despair. Grayson pressed his forehead against the door, tears mixing with the rain. "I'm sorry," he whispered, though he knew Elliot couldn't hear him. "I'm so sorry." Hours later, Grayson sat on Elliot's front steps, clutching the letter in his hands. The rain had stopped, but the cold lingered, seeping into his bones. He hadn't moved, hoping that Elliot would eventually come home. But as the day stretched into evening, his hope began to waver. He unfolded the letter again, his eyes scanning the familiar words. Each sentence felt like a punch to the gut, a reminder of everything he'd done wrong. He'd been so afraid of his own feelings, so determined to fit into a box that he'd hurt the one person who truly saw him. "I'm such an idiot," he muttered, his voice breaking. He wiped at his eyes, though it was useless. The tears kept falling, unstoppable and raw. Why couldn't I just say it? Grayson thought back to all the moments he'd shared with Elliot. The late-night talks, the inside jokes, the way Elliot always seemed to know exactly what he needed. He'd taken it all for granted, blind to the depth of what they had. Now, it felt like he'd lost it forever. As the sun began to set, Grayson stood, his legs heavy with exhaustion. He left the letter in the mailbox, hoping that Elliot would find it when he came back. "Please read it," he whispered to the empty street. "And please, don't give up on us." When Grayson finally walked away, he felt emptier than he ever had before. He didn't know if Elliot would forgive him or if they could ever go back to how things were. All he knew was that he loved him. He always had, even if it had taken him too long to realize it. Elliot never returned to school after that day. Grayson spent weeks searching for him, hoping for a chance to make things right. But all he had left were memories and the hope that somewhere Elliot was finding the happiness he deserved. And as Grayson sat in his room one night, holding one of Elliot's old letters, he whispered into the silence, "I love you, Elliot. I always will." Did you enjoy this story? It's intense, emotional, and full of moments that make us reflect on the complexities of love and the choices we make. Be honest with me. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate today's real-life case? Your opinion matters because every detail counts when we transform lives into stories like this one. And guess what? This story is based on real events. Your story could be next. If you have an amazing story about yourself or someone you know, send it in. It might just become the next video featured here. Who knows? Your experience could inspire millions. This story reminds us how fear can hold us back from truly living. Elliot loved with his whole heart, even knowing his feelings might never be returned. Meanwhile, Grayson's journey shows us how confusion and fear can paralyze us, leading to decisions we deeply regret later. How often do we hold back our feelings, afraid of how the other person might react? And how many times have we regretted not being brave enough? This story is a powerful lesson about vulnerability, acceptance, and the price we pay for not being honest with ourselves. Loving someone is always a risk, but perhaps the greatest risk is never loving at all. Here's a question for all of us. Are we living the lives we truly want, or are we trapped by the fear of what others might think? Now, I want to hear from you. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate this story? Don't forget to leave your rating in the comments. And if you liked it, subscribe to the channel. Give it a thumbs up and hit the notification bell for more stories like this one. I can't wait to hear what you think.